The desert wind carried a sound Cale hadn't heard in years, the desperate gasp of a child. He found them huddled against the storm, a blue-skinned woman and 3 small figures shivering in the poisonous cold. Her eyes met his, hollow with fear. "I'll warm your bed, human," she whispered. "Just don't let them die." Cale Warren moved through his desert days with mechanical precision. Each motion served pure function. He checked air filters at dawn, testing seals with cracked fingers. He measured water stores twice daily, marking levels on metal walls with charcoal. He hunted scuttling rock lizards at dusk, their tough meat providing enough protein to sustain his lean frame. The shelter around him testified to his isolation. Patched together from salvaged landing craft panels and native stones fitted tight against the toxic winds. Earth Command's silence haunted the space between his actions. There were no orders to follow, no reports to file, no medals that mattered here. His decorations meant nothing against the yellow dust that seeped through every crack. Sometimes at night he'd trace the scar tissue mapping his torso. 3 places where shrapnel tore through, 3 more where energy weapons burned deep. But these were surface wounds. The deeper fractures came from knowing Command wrote him off as another casualty of peace. He maintained the salvage comm array out of habit more than hope. The cracked screen flickered with distant signals, merchant hailers, weather distortions, occasional military chatter from patrols he avoided. He listened not for rescue, but for confirmation that something still existed beyond his desolation. The voices sounded too bright against his emptiness, like light seen from a deep cave. They reminded him of everything he'd lost and everything he'd chosen to leave behind. His existence narrowed to a single purpose: endure. Survival required suppressing memory, connection, any softness that might weaken his resolve. He distilled liquor from fermented roots to numb the ache in his joints. He honed an obsidian spearhead for hunting, the rhythmic scraping filling the silent hours. The desert winds carried poison, but they also carried ghosts, echoes of battles where friends fell screaming, moments when he followed orders that cost too much. Then the signal changed. Not the usual static or machinery hum, a sharp intake of breath, too small to be adult, too clean to be animal. He straightened from his workbench, fingers still gripping the spear shaft. The sound came again, a child's gasp, ragged with panic or pain. His training said threat assessment. His instinct said something else entirely. The wind howled outside, but now it carried a new sound, one that would fracture his isolation forever. Cale's training kicked in before conscious thought took hold. Blueskin meant Hunvara. 3 children meant triple consumption. He did the math coldly. Water reserves, food stocks, air filtration load. Every calorie counted now. Each breath filtered through his system carried a price. He knew their species from border conflicts, skirmishes in asteroid belts where rules dissolved into vacuum. They were proud, territorial, and dangerous when cornered. His hand tightened on the reinforced doorframe. He studied them through the reinforced viewport. The woman held herself like someone who'd fought before. Her posture spoke of muscle memory, survival reflexes. But the children broke the equation. The smallest one's breathing came in shallow, wheezing pulls. Yellow dust coated their thin clothing. They wouldn't last an hour in the open. His military mind cataloged the risks: exposure to patrols, resource depletion, noise that might carry on the wind. He'd built his existence around minimizing variables. They were nothing but variables. His instincts told him to secure the perimeter, bar the door, wait them out. Survival meant hard choices. He knew the numbers. He'd made them before. But the children's faces held no threat, just raw animal fear. The woman's offer wasn't strategy. It was surrender, a transaction from someone who'd bargained with life before. She'd already accepted whatever cost came next if it meant another breath for them. The poison in the air worked fast. He watched the smallest child's lips tinge blue at the edges. Each second diminished their chances. He ran the calculation one last time. Help them and risk everything he'd built, or seal the door and live with the certainty of their frozen bodies outside his walls by morning. The math was clear either way. One path held potential death. The other held definite ghosts. His hand moved to the latch mechanism. The metal felt cold under his palm. He'd welded it shut 3 seasons back after a scavenger tried to force entry. Now he broke his own seal. The door swung inward on silent hinges he'd oiled just yesterday. The wind rushed in, carrying the sharp scent of ozone and desperation. They stared at him, 4 sets of alien eyes wide with either hope or terror. He didn't speak. He simply stepped back, making space in the airlock. The woman hesitated only a second before pushing her children inside. Her gaze never left his face, measuring, waiting for the trap to spring. But the only trap here was compassion, and he'd already stepped into it. Her offer hung in the toxic air between them, stripped of all pretense. Relia's proposition wasn't romantic or even personal. It was a transaction carved from desperation, the kind made at borders when guards demand payment for passage. She looked at Kale and saw neither kindness nor cruelty, only capability, shelter, heat, a locked door between her children and the killing wind. Her blue skin shone pale under the emergency lights, her eyes holding the hollowed-out look of someone who'd already surrendered everything but breath itself. She positioned her body between him and the shivering children, without seeming to move. A subtle shift of weight, a slight turn of the shoulders, enough to place herself as the primary point of contact, the first obstacle, the negotiator who'd bear whatever cost this human demanded. Her hands remained visible, open, showing she carried no weapon beyond her desperation. The calculation in her gaze was older than any single conflict, a knowledge passed down through generations of refugees who understood survival often meant trading dignity for tomorrow. This wasn't her first bargaining table. The way her voice didn't tremble, the precision of her offer, she'd done this before. Perhaps with smugglers demanding double the ration packs for safe passage, maybe with scavengers who wanted tech salvaged from her downed ship. Her whisper carried the weight of those earlier negotiations, each one narrowing what she had left to trade. She offered the one thing she thought a solitary human male might value, playing on loneliness she sensed in the starkness of his shelter, the absence of any other presence in the carefully maintained space. But beneath the transaction lay her true plea, the slight tremor in her hands when she gestured toward the children, the way her breath caught as the smallest one coughed again, a wet sound that spoke of lungs already compromised by the poisoned air. She wasn't bargaining for herself. Every syllable, every calculated offer served one purpose: create obligation, make him responsible, ensure that if he took anything from her, he'd have to give survival in return. Kale recognized the maneuver. He'd seen hostages negotiate for their comrades, soldiers trade favors for extra meds. This was no different. The woman's eyes held no expectation of mercy, only the grim determination of someone who knew how these exchanges ended. She'd already accepted whatever he might demand, already compartmentalized the cost. Her children's breathing filled the small space, each ragged inhalation marking time against her offer's expiration. He watched her assess his shelter's resources, the water reclaimer, the sealed food cabinets, the medical kit bolted to the wall. She wasn't seeing comforts. She was inventorying life support systems, calculating how long they might last divided 5 ways instead of 1. Her offer to warm his bed wasn't about intimacy. It was about securing access to those systems, becoming useful enough to justify the resource drain. She was trading the only currency she had left for the right to breathe his air, drink his water, consume his carefully hoarded calories. The children's quiet whimpers seemed to tighten something in her posture. She didn't look back at them, didn't break her focus on Kale, but her shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. She was running out of time. The negotiation needed to close before the human reconsidered, before he remembered how much simpler survival was alone. Her blue fingers clenched once, then relaxed, ready to pay, ready to endure. The bed was just another battlefield, and she'd already lost every other piece of ground. Kale's body shifted into combat mode without conscious command. His eyes swept the shelter, reassessing every corner as potential threat or resource. He secured the outer door first, engaging both manual and magnetic locks. The seals hissed tight against the poisonous wind. He moved to the stone hearth, building the fire not for comfort but for calculated function. The flames would provide vital heat to counter hypothermia and serve as a sterile heat source for water purification. He arranged the children near the warmth but positioned them where he could maintain sightlines to both them and the entrance. Their small forms shivered under the furs he piled around them. He took dried herbs from a sealed container, holding them beneath the children's noses. The aromatic scent served as a stimulant, a field substitute for proper smelling salts. Their inhalation patterns changed almost immediately, breaths deepening as the herbs counteracted some effects of the toxic air exposure. He watched the smallest one closest, noting the slight blue tinge around the lips that signaled early respiratory distress. The child's breathing came in shallow pulls that didn't fill the lungs properly. The broth he prepared wasn't hospitality. It was calculated nutrition. He used preserved meat stock, adding precise amounts of salt and mineral powders to counter dehydration and shock. The mixture heated quickly over the flames, its steam carrying nutrients into the air around them. He offered it in small metal cups, demonstrating how to sip slowly to prevent stomach rejection. The children watched his hands, mimicking his movements with wary precision. His medical training surfaced through years of disuse. He checked each child for external injuries, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency along limbs and torsos. He noted the woman's alert observation of his methods. She recognized the difference between basic care and professional triage. His hands didn't hesitate. They found the swollen joint on the eldest girl's wrist, the abrasions on the boy's knees, the way the smallest child favored one leg when shifting position. He inventoried his resources against 5 people instead of 1. The math was brutal. Water recycler capacity, air filtration load, calorie consumption rates. His mind calculated weeks becoming days, reserves stretching thin as wire. He moved through the shelter, gathering additional medical supplies, organizing them by priority of use. Antiseptics, binding cloth, pain suppressors. Everything had to serve multiple purposes now. The woman's gaze followed his movements, her initial desperation shifting into something more complex. She saw how he positioned himself to always face the door, how his left hand never strayed far from the knife at his belt even while distributing broth, how his eyes constantly scanned the children for changes in condition, while simultaneously monitoring the shelter's perimeter. This was no ordinary hermit surviving day to day. This was someone who'd been trained to protect others under fire. He adjusted the smallest child's position to improve breathing, supporting the tiny back with rolled furs. The action was both medical and protective, creating a defensive barrier around the most vulnerable. Every gesture served dual purposes now. Caregiving became security. Nourishment became fortification. The shelter transformed from isolation chamber to emergency ward under his efficient hands. Cale abandoned words entirely. They were useless here. Instead, he pointed to the steaming cup, then mimed sipping slowly. He showed them how to cradle the warm metal, how to breathe in the vapor before drinking. The eldest girl watched his hands with intense focus. Her blue eyes tracked each movement, recording the precise angle of his wrist, the careful way his fingers supported the cup's base. When he passed her the broth, she replicated his actions exactly. No spillage, no rushed gulping. Her small hands moved with a grace that spoke of careful observation under pressure. They built a language from necessity. Cale pointed to the water filter. The woman spoke a soft word. Sheila. He repeated it, the unfamiliar syllables feeling rough in his mouth. She nodded, her eyes showing the first flicker of something besides fear. He gestured to the dried meat strips. Corin, she said, and he filed the word away. They developed signals for immediate needs, a tap to the throat for thirst, a hand over the stomach for hunger. More complex concepts emerged through demonstration. Cale showed them danger by pointing outside where the wind howled, then making a cutting motion across his throat. Safe was a palm pressed flat against the shelter wall, a slow exhale. The children learned faster than expected. Within hours, the boy could point to the water container and say Sheila without prompting. The girl developed her own gestures, a tug on Cale's sleeve for attention, a finger to her lips when she heard unfamiliar sounds outside. Their communication became a physical dialogue. Cale would demonstrate how to check the air quality by observing dust patterns in the light beams. The children would mimic the action, their small faces serious with concentration. The mother supplemented their learning with her own knowledge, showing them which desert plants produced drinkable moisture when properly prepared. Trust grew through these silent exchanges. When Cale needed to check the youngest child's breathing, he didn't grab or demand. He simply pointed to his own chest, then to the child, and made a listening gesture. The mother nodded, carefully shifting the child closer. The examination proceeded without words, his skilled fingers assessing lung function while the mother watched his face for any sign of concern. They developed a rhythm. Cale would demonstrate a survival technique, the children would practice it. The mother would add refinements from her own experience. The breakthrough came when the eldest girl pointed to the storm outside, then to Cale's medical kit. then made the danger gesture. She'd connected the toxic air to their need for medicine without a single shared word. Cale nodded, impressed despite himself. He showed her how to identify early signs of respiratory distress by observing lip coloration. She watched intently, then immediately checked her siblings' mouths with careful fingers. Their learning wasn't just mimicry, it was adaptation, application. They weren't just memorizing signals. They were building a shared understanding of survival that transcended language barriers. By nightfall, they could indicate needs without panic or confusion. The boy could point to his throat and say Sheila calmly rather than crying. The girl could demonstrate when she heard approaching wind patterns that signaled increased toxicity. The mother could request specific supplies through a combination of gestures and their new shared vocabulary. The silence that had once been filled with fear now held purposeful quiet. The sound of people working together without needing to speak. Cale noticed how Relia's eyes kept cutting toward the door. Not watching the storm. Listening for something else. Her body stayed tense even when the children slept. She'd positioned herself where she could see both the entrance and the small ventilation slits. Her fear had a specific shape. Not the general anxiety of survival, but the sharp focus of someone being hunted. She tried to explain using their fractured language. Her hands shaped words when sounds failed. Arena, she whispered, making a fighting gesture. Taken. She pointed to herself, then made a sweeping motion toward the desert. Her husband, captured for sport, forced to fight until he no longer could. The coalition didn't waste prisoners on labor camps. They turned punishment into entertainment. Her eyes went hollow, remembering it. The hunters wore armor that spread from their shoulders like dark wings, kite-shaped plates that deflected projectiles and dispersed energy blasts. They carried weapons designed for pain, serrated blades that tore flesh, crossbows that fired poisoned darts. They rode six-legged lizards whose scales changed color to match the terrain. The creatures could traverse sinking dunes and razor rock fields without losing speed. Their tracking technology penetrated the desert's interference, sensors that detected body heat through stone, movement through sandstorms, even specific biological signatures. Relia's escape had been desperate, not careful. She'd left a trail of broken branches, disturbed ground, and possibly blood from where the youngest child had fallen on sharp rocks. She'd chosen the poisonous desert because few would follow. But the coalition hunters were not few. They were elite. They considered survival secondary to completion. Some hunters valued trophies above their own lives. They took fingers from refugees, jewelry from children, weapons from those they subdued. Their reputation spread through border worlds like a sickness. They enjoyed the chase as much as the capture. Relia had heard stories of hunters tracking families for weeks across impossible terrain, wearing them down through constant pressure until they simply collapsed from exhaustion. Cale recognized the tactical reality settling around them. They weren't just fighting the environment anymore. They were opposing an organized force with superior technology and relentless methodology. His shelter's defenses were designed for random scavengers and occasional patrols, not dedicated hunters. The air filtration system's hum alone might be detectable at certain frequencies. Their heat signatures would stand out against the cold desert night. He began recalculating everything. Food acquisition needed stealth now, not just efficiency. Water collection required masking thermal output. Movement within the shelter had to minimize noise that might carry. The children's energy would need dampening, their biological signatures potentially masked through chemical means if possible. Every aspect of survival now included an additional variable: evasion. The hunter's persistence changed time itself. What was once measured in seasons now narrowed to days, perhaps hours. They would be methodical, approaching from multiple angles using their mounts to cover ground no human could cross quickly. They'd set up sensor perimeters, gradually tightening the circle. Cale had faced similar tactics during the border wars. He knew how they worked.
How they thought.
What they valued. His hand went to the weapon at his belt. The cool metal felt different now. Not just a tool for hunting rock lizards, a means of defending against something far more dangerous than the environment. The calculations in his mind shifted from survival odds to engagement strategies. Cover positions, fallback points, ways to use the desert itself against them. The poisonous air that had been his enemy might become an ally. Cale's shelter transformed from sanctuary to trap. What worked for solitary survival now worked against them all. The stone walls felt closer, the ceiling lower. 5 bodies generated too much heat, too much moisture. The air filtration system labored under the extra load. Its usual steady hum developed a strained, vibrating quality. Cale watched the filter indicators change from green to amber. The system could handle one person's exhalations easily. 5 sets of lungs breathing, sweating, living. It pushed the machinery beyond its design. Food became a countdown. His careful reserves, measured in careful portions for one, vanished at alarming speed. The children's metabolisms burned through calories faster than his own maintenance needs. He recalculated daily, reducing rations further each time. The broth grew thinner, the meat strips shorter. Their stomachs would eventually demand more than he could safely provide. Every meal was a subtraction from their remaining time. Water recycling efficiency dropped severely. The system worked by processing moisture from breath and sweat. With 5 people, the reclaimer couldn't keep pace. Condensation formed on the cold stone walls, a waste of precious hydration. He caught it with cloths, wringing them back into the collection tank. The children's thirst became a constant background concern. Dehydration would weaken them faster than hunger. Their energy signatures would shine like beacons on advanced scanners. One life form might blend with desert background noise. 5 created a distinct cluster. Body heat, movement, even their electrical nervous systems emitted detectable energy. Coalition hunters used technology that could differentiate living patterns from environmental static. Their shelter was no longer a hidden refuge. It was a target slowly announcing its presence. Defensive positions designed for one fighter offered little protection for multiple vulnerables. Cale's firing lanes assumed he'd be mobile, using cover to reposition. Now he had to consider 3 children who couldn't move quickly, and a mother who'd stand her ground to protect them. The shelter's layout forced them into a single chamber during attacks. A single breach would mean no fallback position, no secondary defense. The location itself worked against them. Other scavengers knew this place. Drifters sometimes camped nearby when storms grew too fierce. Earth Command patrols had this coordinate logged from his initial crash. The hunters would eventually question those sources, follow those trails. Staying meant waiting for discovery. The mathematics of probability turned against them with each passing hour. Moving presented its own brutal equation. The toxic exterior offered no protection from wind or radiation. Their makeshift breathing filters would last only hours before clogging with yellow dust. The children's smaller lungs would struggle with thinner air at higher altitudes. Relia's condition might deteriorate under physical strain. But remaining meant certain resource exhaustion or confrontation on unfavorable terms. The shelter's security had become an illusion that would kill them slowly instead of quickly. Every option carried unacceptable risk. Their safety had transformed into the very thing that threatened them most. Cale started with the weather because the desert decided everything. He showed the eldest girl how to read the sky. He pointed to cloud formations that promised storms, the specific yellow tinge that meant increasing toxicity. He taught her to listen to wind patterns, the high whistle through rock formations versus the low moan across open dunes. Each sound carried different threats. The children watched his hands, his eyes, the way he tilted his head to catch subtle changes in air pressure. They mimicked his posture, their small faces serious with concentration. He demonstrated toxin checking at different altitudes. He held a moisture-sensitive cloth at knee level, then chest height, then overhead. The yellow stain appeared faster near the ground. The children took turns testing the air, learning that poison settled low while clearer air sometimes lingered above. They practiced moving through the shelter with silent precision. Cale showed them how to place feet near walls where floorboards felt more solid, how to distribute weight to prevent creaking. They learned to navigate in near darkness using touch and memory. First aid training used their limited supplies. Cale unrolled the medical kit, demonstrating each item's purpose through action rather than explanation. He showed how to clean wounds with antiseptic, wrapping injuries with tight, efficient bandages. The children practiced on each other, their small hands learning pressure points and knot tying. The eldest girl proved surprisingly adept, her fingers remembering complex wrapping patterns after a single demonstration. Salvage identification became a daily lesson. Cale laid out items recovered from the desert: rusted metal fragments, broken circuitry, shattered containment vessels. He showed them which edges might cut, which surfaces might hold residual radiation, which materials could be repurposed for tools. The children learned to sort through debris with careful fingers, setting aside anything useful while avoiding hazardous materials. Water conservation followed breathing patterns. Kale demonstrated controlled inhalation, slow draw through the nose, measured exhale through pressed lips. He showed how this reduced moisture loss in dry air. The children practiced while sitting still, then while performing simple tasks. Their small lungs adapted quickly to the disciplined rhythm. Their education became survival drills disguised as games. Who could move quietest from one wall to another? Who could identify the most useful item in a pile of salvage? Who could maintain controlled breathing longest? The mother watched from the corner, adding her knowledge of desert creatures that might provide food or present danger. She showed them how to identify burrowing insects that stored water in their bodies, which spiny plants could be harvested for moisture-rich roots. Within days, the children could perform basic safety procedures without supervision. The girl could test air quality using the stained cloths. The boy could bandage a wound with reasonable efficiency. They all moved through the shelter with acquired stealth, their footsteps barely whispering against stone. They developed a system of silent signals, a raised hand for caution, a tapped finger count for how many minutes until the next air check. Their learning wasn't theoretical. It was physical, immediate, necessary. They absorbed survival not as information but as instinct, their young minds adapting to threats they couldn't yet fully comprehend, but were learning to navigate through practiced repetition and observed demonstration. Kale maintained his night watch, but now he carried observers. The eldest girl shadowed his movements, her small form mimicking his patrol patterns along the shelter walls. She learned to pause at each viewing slit, keeping her body angled to minimize visibility from outside. Her head tilted at the same precise angle as his when listening to night sounds. She began to recognize threat patterns within the wind's constant noise. The skittering of rock lizards differed from the scrape of boots on stone. Her education became tactile, immediate, necessary. They developed a silent language of signals. One raised finger meant possible movement detected. 2 fingers indicated confirmed contact. A flat palm pressed downward signaled immediate stillness. The children learned these signs through repetition, their young minds adapting to the seriousness of the communication. They practiced during daylight hours, turning defense drills into games that barely concealed their deadly purpose. The girl became proficient at relaying messages without sound, her small hands articulating complex warnings. Relia took day watches while Kale ventured out for resources. Her sharp eyes scanned the horizon from different angles. Her knowledge of Hanvara tracking methods adding new layers to their security. She recognized bird flight patterns that signaled disturbances, cloud formations that promised relief or danger. Their schedules interlocked like gear teeth. When Kale returned exhausted from salvage runs, Relia would already have the children positioned for quick evacuation if needed. Their defense became a continuous rotation without gaps. The children adapted to sleeping through watch changes and low-voiced consultations. They learned to differentiate between the normal sounds of security checks and the urgent whispers that meant real danger. Their rest became deeper, more efficient, their small bodies conserving energy for whatever might come. They could wake instantly when touched on the shoulder, alert without the disorientation that might betray their position. Kale found himself explaining tactics he'd never put into words before. He showed the girl how to use peripheral vision to monitor multiple areas simultaneously. He demonstrated how to control breathing to steady aim, how to judge distances in poor light using known objects for reference. His teaching became more detailed as her understanding grew. She began anticipating his instructions, her questions showing she'd grasped concepts he hadn't yet verbalized. Their unit began functioning with military precision. The children could execute emergency drills without panic, moving to designated safe positions with quiet efficiency. Relia could maintain watch while preparing food, her attention divided but never diminished. Kale could coordinate their movements with hand signals alone, their responses becoming nearly instantaneous. They developed contingency plans for various scenarios: sudden storm escalation, approaching patrols, interior breaches. The shelter transformed from a place of individual survival to a coordinated defense post. Each person understood their role, their limitations, their responsibilities. The children's earlier games of stealth became practiced reality. Relia's knowledge of the desert complemented Kale's combat training. Their different skills created a layered defense that no single person could have maintained alone. The night watch became shared duty, the darkness now holding multiple sets of watching eyes instead of just one pair staring into the void. Protection became collective responsibility. The girl would sometimes touch Kale's arm during watches, pointing out a sound he'd missed. Relia would adjust the children's positions based on light changes Kale hadn't noticed. Their different perspectives created a more complete security picture. The solitary sentinel had become part of a team, his vigilance now supported by others who'd learned to see the night through soldiers' eyes. The water recycler's indicator flickered from steady green to a strained amber pulse. 7 days with 5 people instead of 1. The system couldn't process the extra moisture from their breath, the condensation from their bodies. Kale watched the reservoir levels drop despite their careful rationing. Each cup of water meant a subtraction from their remaining time. The math was simple and brutal. Their bodies needed more than the machinery could provide. Food stores diminished at an alarming rate. His careful calculations for solitary survival became meaningless. The children's growing bodies demanded calories beyond mere maintenance. Their metabolisms burned through the preserved meat and dried grains like fire through dry grass. He reduced portions again, making the broth thinner, the serving smaller. Their hunger became a visible thing in the way they watched his hands during meal preparation, in the way they licked cups clean long after the last drop was gone. Relia's condition required medication he couldn't replace. The yellow powder she took twice daily came from a dwindling supply. She never complained, but he saw the way her hands trembled sometimes, the slight sheen of sweat on her blue skin after physical exertion. The medicine stabilized something essential within her, something the desert environment aggravated. Without it, she would weaken rapidly, becoming another vulnerability instead of a partner in their survival. Salvage runs yielded diminishing returns. The areas near the shelter had been picked clean over seasons of solitary scavenging. Now he had to venture further into toxic zones, exposing himself longer to the poisonous air for less reward. He returned with fewer usable components, less salvageable tech, fewer containers of preserved goods. The risk-reward equation tilted dangerously toward unacceptable exposure. They faced the inevitable calculation: risk death outside seeking resources or face certain starvation within their supposed safety. The shelter's walls offered protection from immediate threats but guaranteed slow depletion. Every day inside meant consuming irreplaceable supplies. Every day outside meant potential encounter with hunters or succumbing to the toxic environment. Kale began teaching the children desert botany. He showed them how to identify the thorny gray vines that stored drinkable moisture in their hollow stems. They learned to recognize the scraggly blue-leafed shrubs whose roots could be boiled into nutritious paste. The children's quick minds absorbed the knowledge, their small fingers learning to test plants for edibility through careful observation and scent. Relia revealed her people's nutritional knowledge. She showed them how Hanvara metabolism processed certain minerals differently from humans. She identified desert fungi that provided essential nutrients for her species, but were toxic to humans. They developed a system of cross-species foraging, each learning what the other could safely consume. Her understanding of native flora complemented his survival training, creating a more complete picture of their environment's possibilities. Their survival now depended on blending two worlds of knowledge: Kale's human understanding of shelter security and resource management, combined with Relia's innate knowledge of alien biology and native species. The children became the bridge between them, adapting quickly to both systems, their young bodies tolerating foods that might sicken either adult alone. They developed new recipes using native plants, creating meals that sustained both species through careful combination and preparation. The crisis forced innovation, where solitary survival had demanded only conservation. They learned to extract water from unexpected sources, to identify edible insects, to use every part of whatever they harvested. Their existence became a continuous experiment in cross-species sustainability, each day bringing new discoveries about what their combined knowledge could achieve against the desert's harsh economy. The first drone appeared as a speck against the yellow sky, moving with the insect-like persistence Kale remembered from border conflicts. He recognized the flight pattern immediately, the zigzag search grid favored by coalition reconnaissance units. His hand went up in the silent signal for immediate stillness. The children froze where they stood, their training overriding instinct. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the wind's constant moan against the stones. Kale implemented emergency protocols with practiced efficiency. He sealed the ventilation slits, plunging the shelter into near darkness. He dampened the fire to coals, eliminating thermal signature. The children moved to pre-designated positions against the coldest walls where body heat would blend with stone. Relia positioned herself near the entrance, her bone dagger held ready. Her eyes met Kale's, showing she understood this might be their final stand. The drones drew closer, their engine whine cutting through the wind noise. 3 of them now, flying in coordinated patterns that covered all approaches. Kale identified their model from the distinct rotor configuration, Mark 7 Scouts, equipped with multi-spectrum sensors and long-range transmitters. He knew their weaknesses. The toxic winds disrupted their precision guidance systems. Their battery life shortened dramatically in high-particulate environments. They relied on visual confirmation before engaging weapons. The children maintained their positions with remarkable composure. The eldest girl watched Kale's hands for signals, her breathing controlled and silent. The boy pressed his small body against the cold stone, minimizing his thermal signature. The smallest child stayed completely still in Relia's shadow. Their earlier drills had become instinct. They understood the stakes without needing explanation. Kale monitored the drone's movements through the narrowest viewing slit. They circled the shelter twice, their sensors scanning for life signs. He knew what they sought: body heat, movement, energy emissions. Their current defensive measures should confuse the basic sensors, but advanced scanning might penetrate their precautions. He calculated the odds. The drones would continue their pattern for approximately 20 minutes before requiring battery replacement or returning to base. Relia positioned herself as final defender near the children. Her grip on the dagger showed she understood its limited effectiveness against armored drones. Her role wasn't offense but last resort protection. Should the drones breach the shelter, she would create whatever distraction necessary to give Kale time to respond. Her stance communicated absolute readiness. She'd accepted that some defenses required physical sacrifice. The waiting stretched through the longest hours of Kale's isolation. Each minute felt measured in heartbeats. The drones completed 3 full circuits, their sensors occasionally pausing as if detecting anomalies. Once a drone hovered directly above the shelter, its rotors kicking up yellow dust that sifted through the stone ceiling. The children didn't flinch. Their discipline held despite the visible tension in their small bodies. Finally, the drones broke pattern and flew eastward, their engine noise fading into the wind. The immediate threat had passed, but the implication remained. Their location was now logged in coalition databases. The drones would return with expanded search patterns, perhaps with heavier weapons or ground teams. The hunters knew approximately where to look now. Their sanctuary had become a marked position. Kale maintained the emergency protocols for another hour after the drones disappeared. He knew better than to assume immediate safety. The coalition often used staggered search patterns, sending secondary units to investigate areas where initial scans showed ambiguous results. The children remained at their posts, their training overriding the natural desire to relax. They'd learned that survival often depended on maintaining vigilance after apparent danger passed. The shelter felt different when Kale finally signaled all clear. The walls seemed thinner, the air heavier with impending threat. Their defensive measures had worked temporarily, but they'd also confirmed their vulnerability. The drone's presence changed their calculations from if they would be found to when. Every protocol, every drill, every silent signal now served a more urgent purpose. They weren't just surviving day to day anymore. They were preparing for confrontation. Kale weighed the equation with cold precision. Staying meant certain discovery. The drone scan had confirmed their location in coalition databases. Hunters would return with better equipment, more numbers. His shelter's defenses were built for random threats, not organized pursuit. The stone walls that had protected him alone would become a tomb for 5. Every hour they remained increased the probability of confrontation on terms he couldn't win. The mountains offered alternatives. High passes provided natural cover from scanners. Underground water sources might exist in deep caves where condensation collected. The rugged terrain would slow pursuit, favoring defenders over attackers. He'd heard rumors during his solitary years, whispers of communities living beyond coalition reach, survivors who'd established hidden networks in the most inaccessible regions. These weren't certainties but possibilities worth chasing when the alternative was capture. The journey itself presented brutal challenges. The children's endurance would be tested to its limits. The mountain air grew thinner with altitude, requiring more effort for every breath. The toxic winds sometimes gathered in high valleys, creating deadly pockets of concentrated poison. Relia's condition might deteriorate with physical strain and reduced oxygen. Her medication was already running low, and the mountains offered no guarantee of finding the specific plants needed for more. He began preparations methodically. Travel packs required careful balancing of essentials versus weight. Each item had to serve multiple purposes. Blankets became weather protection and camouflage. Medical supplies doubled as water purification tools. He reduced their possessions to the absolute minimum, knowing every extra gram would cost energy they couldn't spare. The children watched him work, their faces showing understanding beyond their years. He taught them marching rhythms to conserve energy on the difficult terrain. They practiced around the shelter, learning to match their breathing to specific step patterns. The eldest girl proved particularly adept, her natural coordination making the movements look effortless. She taught her siblings with patient gestures, reinforcing what Cale demonstrated. Their small bodies adapted to the disciplined cadence faster than he'd expected. The decision carried no celebration, only grim necessity. Cale knew the mountains from distant reconnaissance during his military service, but he hadn't traversed their deeper reaches in years. The terrain changed with each season's storms. Passages once open now blocked by rockfalls. Water sources once reliable now dried to dust. Their fate hinged on reaching higher ground before the hunters returned, before their supplies ran out, before Rilia's condition worsened beyond recovery. He made final adjustments to their packs, testing weight distribution and accessibility. The children practiced emergency drills specific to travel, quick concealment, silent communication, rapid treatment of altitude sickness. Their training had shifted from shelter defense to mobile survival. The mountain journey would demand constant adaptation, every step forward carrying them further from known safety into uncertain refuge. Their survival now depended on reaching terrain that represented both hope and profound danger, a calculation where the risks of movement finally outweighed the certainty of staying. Cale noticed the shift first in small actions. He began preparing the children's meals before they woke, adjusting portions to match their growing appetites without conscious calculation. His hands would reach for a blanket before a child shivered, position a water container before thirst was expressed. These anticipations came not from strategy, but from something deeper, a connection that bypassed tactical thinking entirely. The constant assessment of threats and resources now included their comfort as a factor in survival equations. The eldest girl started mirroring his security checks without prompting. She would pause at viewing slits, her head tilting at the precise angle he used when listening for approaching threats. Her small hands would test door seals, her eyes scanning the horizon with acquired vigilance. She began echoing his commands to her siblings, her voice taking on the same measured tone he used during drills. Her development from frightened child to junior sentinel happened through observation and emulation, her instincts aligning with his through shared purpose. Relia's medical knowledge proved vital during a crisis when the youngest child developed a fever. While Cale prepared standard antiseptics, she identified a desert fungus whose spores caused the specific symptoms. She prepared a poultice using crushed roots from plants Cale had considered worthless. The child's breathing eased within hours. Her understanding of native biology complemented his human medical training, creating a more complete healthcare system than either could maintain alone. Their skills interlocked like puzzle pieces, each covering the other's limitations. Silent understandings developed where language failed. A glance between Cale and Relia could coordinate entire security adjustments. The children learned to read his body language, responding to subtle shifts in posture that indicated changing threat levels. They developed a communication system based on observed patterns rather than explained rules. A tapped finger rhythm meant check air quality. A certain way of stacking firewood signaled possible weather changes. Their interactions became a dance of unspoken coordination. Cale caught himself thinking in terms of we rather than I. His plans now included their capabilities, their needs, their safety as primary considerations. When considering mountain routes, he factored in the children's endurance levels and Relia's medical requirements alongside terrain challenges. His solitary survival mindset had expanded to encompass their collective well-being. The shift felt natural, inevitable, as necessary as breathing the filtered air. Their survival transformed from individual endurance to collective achievement. The children's successful adaptation to altitude changes reflected Kale's teaching and their own resilience. Relia's ability to identify edible plants supplemented Kale's ration planning. Each person's contribution became essential to their continued existence. Their successes belonged to all, their failures absorbed by the group rather than borne alone. The children's laughter, once a security risk to be minimized, became a sound worth protecting. Kale found himself positioning their sleeping area to maximize restful sleep, rather than optimal defense. He noticed how their playful moments improved morale, how their smiles made harsh conditions more bearable. Their joy became another resource to safeguard, another reason to persevere through difficulties. He realized the truth one evening while watching them practice silent signals. Their small faces showed concentration rather than fear, competence rather than helplessness. They weren't just survivors he protected. They were partners in this struggle. Their presence had reminded him of connections deeper than duty, purposes beyond mere survival. They had given him back his humanity even as he fought to preserve their lives. The calculation had changed forever. No longer just keeping them alive, but building something worth living for together. Kale's calculations gained unwelcome variables. Strategic decisions now carried emotional weight that skewed his risk assessments. He found himself prioritizing their comfort alongside survival, factoring in variables his military training never covered. The children's dependence created vulnerabilities no tactical manual addressed. Their trust in his protection became a weak point enemies could exploit, a liability he couldn't fortify against. His mind struggled to reconcile combat logic with caregiving instincts. The mother's gratitude felt heavier than hostility sometimes. Her silent thanks during meal distributions, her watchful protection of his sleep. These small acknowledgments created obligations beyond mere survival. They reminded him that his actions now affected more than his own continued breathing. Her appreciation became another factor in his planning, another consideration when evaluating dangerous options. Memories of fallen comrades resurfaced with new clarity. He remembered faces he'd tried to forget, soldiers who'd died under his command despite his best efforts. Those failures had driven him into isolation originally. Now the potential loss of these new dependents threatened to break something in him beyond repair. Their deaths would represent more than mission failure. They would confirm his deepest fears about his capacity to protect anyone. Their potential survival offered a redemption he hadn't known he needed. The children's growing skills, their adapting to this harsh world, their quiet trust in his guidance, these small successes began healing fractures he'd thought permanent. Each day they survived together became a silent rebuttal to his past failures. Their resilience offered proof that some things could be saved, some people protected, despite overwhelming odds. The emotional risk assessment became his constant internal dialogue. Every decision now balanced potential pain against certain emptiness. Choosing to move the children through dangerous terrain meant risking their lives to avoid certain capture. Staying put meant risking slow resource depletion against temporary safety. His military mind sought clean answers where none existed. The equations had become messy, human, fraught with variables he couldn't quantify but couldn't ignore. He noticed how the children's laughter affected his strategic thinking. Their moments of joy became factors in his planning, considerations as real as water reserves or ammunition counts. Protecting their ability to experience happiness became part of the mission parameters. This emotional dimension changed his leadership style from pure authority to something more collaborative, more adaptive to their human needs. The mother's medical knowledge saved them repeatedly, her contributions reinforcing the value of their connection. Her ability to identify medicinal plants, her understanding of alien biology, her calm during crises, these weren't liabilities but essential assets. Their interdependence became their greatest strength, transforming the group from burden to partnership. The emotional risk began feeling worth taking when balanced against their combined capabilities. Kale's transformation from solitary survivor to protector represented a profound psychological shift. His willingness to embrace vulnerability marked a departure from his previous existence. The certainty of emptiness he'd known before now seemed worse than the risk of potential pain. Their presence had given him purpose beyond mere endurance, reasons to continue that had nothing to do with survival statistics and everything to do with human connection. The calculation had finally tipped toward hope, however dangerous that hope might be. The sharp metal tore through Cale's forearm as he pulled salvage from the wreckage. A deep cut, clean but serious. Blood welled immediately, dripping onto the yellow dust. He clamped his other hand over the wound, applying pressure out of habit. But before he could reach for his medical kit, small hands were already there. The eldest girl moved with precision that mirrored his training exactly. She pressed a clean cloth against the cut, her fingers positioning at the precise angle he'd demonstrated weeks before. Her pressure was firm but controlled exactly as he'd taught her for arterial bleeding. She didn't hesitate, didn't look to him for confirmation. Her face showed concentration, not panic. She'd absorbed the lessons beyond mere repetition. Relia was already crushing dried herbs between her palms. She mixed them with water from her own ration, creating a paste with knowledge from her world. Her movements were economical, practiced. She applied the mixture to the wound without asking permission. The paste cooled the burning instantly, its astringent quality already slowing the bleeding. Her herbal knowledge complemented his modern medicine, creating a hybrid treatment more effective than either alone. The children took positions without being told. The boy watched the entrance, his small body positioned in the defensive posture Cale had drilled into them. The girl maintained pressure on the wound while Relia worked. The smallest child brought the medical kit, placing it within reach though neither adult needed it now. Their coordinated response was seamless, instinctual. They functioned as a unit, each performing their role with quiet competence. Cale watched them work with growing realization. Their competence revealed how thoroughly they'd absorbed his teaching. The girl's pressure application was textbook perfect. The boy's watch position covered the blind spot he always emphasized. Their movements showed they weren't just mimicking. They understood the principles behind the actions. They'd transformed from liabilities into capable partners through observation and practice. Their care lacked the transactional quality of his initial efforts. When he'd first taken them in, every action served calculated survival purposes. Their care now held different motivations. The girl's hands were gentle as they maintained pressure. Relia's application of the poultice carried concern beyond mere medical necessity. The children's watchfulness reflected genuine protection, not drilled obedience. The exchange had become reciprocal rather than conditional. He accepted their help with the same practicality he'd always offered care. There was no resistance, no prideful refusal. He recognized good technique when he saw it. The girl's pressure control was actually better than his own one-handed attempt could have been. Relia's herbal knowledge addressed pain and infection in ways his standard medkit couldn't. Their combined efforts provided superior treatment to what he could have managed alone. The hierarchy of protector and protected began, dissolving into mutual support. Cale watched the children maintaining security while Relia bandaged his arm. He realized they were all protecting each other now. His injury had created an opportunity for them to demonstrate their growing capabilities. The dynamic had shifted from vertical protection to horizontal collaboration. They were becoming interdependent, each contributing unique skills to collective survival. His assessment of their value changed in that moment. They weren't burdens to be carried or responsibilities to be managed. They were partners with developing skills, each bringing something essential to their shared existence. The girl's quick learning, Relia's traditional knowledge, the children's adaptability. These were assets, not liabilities. The injury had revealed their true worth beyond mere survival numbers. The transformation completed as the bandage was tied off. Cale looked at the competent hands that had treated him, the alert postures maintaining watch, the quiet efficiency that had replaced his solitary capabilities. The protector had been protected, the teacher taught by his students. The line between caring and being cared for had blurred into something more meaningful, a mutual commitment that strengthened them all. Cale discovered the coalition's tracking extended beyond standard scans. Their sensors hunted specific energy signatures, the kind unique to certain biologies. The children's hybrid nature emitted a faint but distinct frequency, a signal he couldn't mask with shielding or distance. Every hour they remained in the shelter amplified their detectability. The drones hadn't been conducting random scans. They'd been hunting this specific frequency, narrowing the search grid with each pass. Their safety had always been temporary, their location already compromised. They faced a simple equation with terrible variables. Stay and face certain detection within days as the coalition refined their search patterns, or move into the toxic mountains where survival was uncertain but possible. The journey would test their endurance, expose them to environmental hazards, and potentially trigger Relia's condition. But remaining meant guaranteed capture or death when the hunters returned in force. The calculation was clear despite its brutality. Kale made the decision not from pure logic alone. Something deeper than tactical assessment guided his choice. He found himself planning beyond immediate survival, considering their future needs rather than just emergency protocols. His mental calculations shifted from if we survive to when we reach safety. The change felt natural, inevitable, as necessary as the air filtration that kept them breathing. He began seeing them not as refugees to protect, but as responsibilities to nurture. His thoughts turned to their education, their development, their need for more than mere survival. He considered what skills they'd require in a safer environment, what knowledge they'd need to build lives beyond constant danger. His military mindset expanded to include their growth as people, not just their preservation as living beings. The children's unique biology became both their greatest vulnerability and their most valuable asset. Their ability to adapt, to learn, to endure, these weren't just survival traits. They were foundations for whatever future they might build. Kale recognized that protecting them meant more than keeping them alive. It meant giving them the tools to thrive if they reached safety. His language reflected the transformation. He spoke of mountain routes as passages to possibility, rather than just escape paths. He discussed water sources as sustainable resources rather than temporary solutions. The children noticed the shift, their own anxiety lessening as his certainty grew. They began asking questions about what came after the mountains, about places where the air didn't burn and the wind didn't carry poison. Relia watched the change in him with quiet understanding. She saw how his protective instincts had expanded from duty to devotion. His careful planning now included her people's traditions, her children's unique needs, her own medical requirements. He wasn't just leading them to safety. He was building a framework for their continued existence beyond mere survival. The lone wolf had chosen the pack. His solitary existence had been shattered not just by their presence but by their value. Their survival had become intertwined with his own purpose, their futures linked in ways that transcended calculation. The decision to move wasn't abandonment of safety but investment in possibility. Every step toward the mountains represented commitment to something larger than his own continued breathing. He finalized preparations with renewed purpose. The travel packs contained not just survival gear but seeds for future gardens, learning materials scavenged from ruins, medical supplies for long-term care. His planning horizon extended beyond immediate danger to potential prosperity. The risk felt worth taking when balanced against what they might gain. The point of no return had been crossed not when they left the shelter, but when he accepted that their lives mattered more than his solitude. Kale's combat skills transformed into instruments of preservation. His terrain reading, honed in a dozen war zones, now navigated natural hazards instead of enemy positions. He identified unstable rock formations that might collapse under their weight. He recognized subtle changes in wind patterns that signaled approaching toxic fronts. His military eyes saw safety routes where others saw only impassable cliffs. Each day's journey became a tactical exercise in avoiding environmental threats rather than engaging hostile forces. His discipline provided structure when chaos threatened. The strict routines of military life became survival protocols that kept them functioning under extreme stress. He maintained watch rotations even when exhaustion made every movement painful. He enforced water rationing despite desperate thirst. This rigidity wasn't oppression. It was the framework that prevented panic from overwhelming them. The children learned to rely on these structures, their young minds finding security in predictable patterns amid the unpredictable desert. Medical knowledge acquired through battlefield trauma, now healed instead of patching soldiers for further combat. He treated the children's scrapes and fevers with the same precision he'd used on wounded comrades. His field surgery experience helped him remove a toxic thorn from the boy's foot, with minimal scarring. The sterilization techniques learned in military hospitals prevented infections when supplies were scarce. Each successful treatment represented a victory unlike any he'd known in service. His tactical mind developed evacuation plans that prioritized safety over speed. He mapped alternative routes to their mountain destination, each with fallback positions and emergency rendezvous points. He calculated travel times based on the children's endurance rather than military standards. His contingency planning included scenarios for weather changes, pursuit patterns, and medical emergencies. The strategic thinking that once organized battalion movements now coordinated the survival of 4 vulnerable lives. The children began calling him Captain without irony. The title shifted from military rank to term of respect earned through action. They said it with the same tone they used for Relia's maternal terms, a blend of affection and acknowledgement of his protective role. The word shed its martial connotations, becoming simply who he was to them. Their leader, their guardian, their surest chance of survival. Relia consulted him on decisions beyond security matters. She asked his opinion on child-rearing questions, on moral dilemmas, on how to balance Hanvara traditions with their current reality. Her trust extended beyond his combat capabilities to his judgment and character. Their conversations became partnerships where military experience and cultural wisdom combined to navigate challenges neither could overcome alone. His identity expanded beyond soldiering. The metals gathering dust in his abandoned quarters meant less than the children's successful adaptation to each new challenge. Their growing competence mattered more than any commendation he'd received. Their laughter held more value than promotions he'd earned. The respect in Relia's eyes outweighed the salutes of subordinate officers. He was becoming something new, a hybrid of warrior and caretaker, his combat skills reforged into tools for building rather than destroying. The transformation showed in small moments. The way he could bandage a wound and tell a comforting story simultaneously. How his tactical assessments now included the children's educational needs alongside security concerns. His military precision applied to planting seeds for future harvests. His strategic mind planning sustainable living rather than combat operations. The warrior had found peace in protection. His greatest battles now fought against hunger and exposure rather than enemy forces. His service continued, but its purpose had fundamentally changed. Cale began thinking beyond the next sandstorm, the next meal. His mental calculations extended past immediate survival to questions of development and growth. He scanned salvage for items that served no defensive purpose. Faded picture books with colorful illustrations. Broken musical instruments that might be repaired. Scraps of fabric that could become something other than bandages or patches. The children needed education, not just endurance. Their minds required stimulation beyond danger drills and survival techniques. He imagined a more permanent structure in the mountain passes. Not just shelter from storms, but a home with separate spaces for sleeping. A protected area for learning. Perhaps even a small garden if they could find viable seeds. His salvage goals shifted from pure necessity to potential comfort. He began collecting items that improved quality of life. Thicker insulation materials, better lighting components. Containers that could store personal belongings rather than just supplies. The children's questions changed as they grew more secure. They asked about stars instead of storms, about animals instead of enemies. Their curiosity demanded answers about beauty and wonder, not just danger and survival. Cale found himself describing constellations he'd learned during night watches, explaining how different cultures mapped the sky. He showed them how to identify seasonal changes by flower blooms rather than just storm patterns. Relia's skills gained new appreciation beyond their survival utility. Her ability to create games from nothing, her knowledge of stories and songs, her talent for making meager meals feel like celebrations. These became valued contributions to their daily lives. She taught the children traditional Hanvara accounting games using pebbles, turning mathematics lessons into cultural preservation. Her presence offered normalcy amid their abnormal existence. Their group developed shared memories and private jokes. The time the boy mistook a cleaning tool for a weapon. The way the youngest child pronounced certain words in their blended language. These moments created bonds stronger than shared danger alone. Laughter became a regular sound in their shelter, no longer seen as a security risk but as essential to their well-being. Their interactions lost the tense quality of emergency and gained the easy rhythm of family life. Cale's nightmares transformed. The flashbacks of combat and fallen comrades occurred less frequently. Instead, he dreamed of future threats to his new family. Visions of the children endangered, of Relia harmed, of their hard-won safety collapsing. His anxieties had shifted from past trauma to future protection. The dreams reflected his changed priorities, his deepest fears now tied to those he loved rather than those he'd lost. He realized the fundamental change one evening while watching them sleep. The children's faces showed peace instead of tension. Relia's breathing came easy and regular. Their survival was no longer the primary goal. He was building something worth protecting, a family, a home, a future that extended beyond the next sunrise. His purpose had transformed from mere endurance to creation. Every action now served this larger objective, this deeper commitment to something that would last beyond his own lifespan. The mountain journey represented not just escape, but foundation. Their new shelter would be built with permanence in mind, designed for living rather than just surviving. His military skills would serve domestic purposes, security for a home rather than defense of a position. The transition felt natural and inevitable. The solitary survivor had become a builder, his energies directed toward construction rather than mere preservation. The storm arrived as they crested the final ridge, not the poisonous wind they'd fled, but a cleansing rain washing yellow dust from their faces. Below lay a sheltered valley with clear streams and intact structures. Cale watched the children run toward the green, their laughter carrying on the clean air. His isolation had been broken by the simplest human needs, a child's gasp, a mother's desperation. The protection he'd offered became his redemption. The danger at his door had delivered them all to this moment, where survival could finally mean living.